Welcome back, fight fans, to another episode of GTS Combat. And yo, I'm looking ahead to what should be a highly anticipated fight. This time, we've got the return of Jake, the problem child Paul, going up against UFC veteran, potential welterweight legend in Tyron, the chosen one Woodley, on August 28th. So let's get into it. Like I said, you got Jake Paul really trying to take another step up in the level of opposition that he's facing. He started off against KSI's little brother Deji in just an amateur boxing match. Then he moved on a little bit. He faced what people were saying was going to be a bit of a too much of a test for him in Anderson Gibb. He was meant to be a bit of a terror. He was meant to have a bit of boxing behind him. He was meant to have a bit of, the skills to pay the bills. But Jake Paul walked straight through him. So then we said, let's see Jake against an actual athlete. Let's see Jake Paul face someone who actually trains, day in, day out. Maybe not for combat sports, but like I said, an actual athlete. And that's what he done in Nate Robinson. And I'm not acting like I know a lot about him. I'm from the UK. I don't really follow the basketball scene. But apparently he was a bit of a big name. Apparently he was a bit of a star. Apparently he was very well known over in America and especially in the NBA scene. And once again, Jake Paul made him look like a bit of a joke, man. He made it look like it was a walk in the park. He made Nate Robinson look like he didn't deserve to be in there. He made Nate Robinson look like the complete novice, the complete amateur. And I know that's what he is, but he was supposed to be the athlete coming into there, and he just really didn't look like he had any of his bearings when he was in that fight. He didn't look like he knew where he was. He looked like a fish out of water. Whilst Jake Paul, he was fucking swimming. He was fucking Michael Phelps. He was swishing through. You know what I mean? He was the bollocks in that fight. Nate Robinson looked like a novice. Jake Paul looked like the bollocks. And I know it's easy to look like the bollocks when you're against someone who looks as shit as Nate Robinson. But anyway, he got the job done. So then what was people saying? They were saying, we want to see you face an actual sort of combat sports athlete. Someone who actually knows how to throw hands. Now, there was a bit of, taking what they wanted from that. They took the combat sports athlete, but they left out the part where the geezer can throw hands, because then they found a guy in Ben Askren, funky Ben Askren, a bit of I suppose you could call him a legend in mixed martial arts. I wouldn't necessarily go as far to say legend, but he was a champion in 2 different organisations, in one championship and Bellator, a former NCAA all-out, college American wrestler. I don't know about all that NCAA, but I've fucking heard about it enough while I was watching MMA and the UFC, and it's a very sort of prestigious sort of wrestling accomplishment from what I can take from it. Not going to act like I know too much about it. Like I said, I'm from the UK. We're not all about that wrestling game. But yeah, he stepped up. He fought an actual legit mixed martial artist in Ben Askren, like I said, a 2 organisation champion. Just actually retired on a bit of a down slope. Also had hip surgery. Never known for throwing hands. He had probably one of the most embarrassing sort of stand-up battles against Damian Maia when we saw his striking in that fight when the fight couldn't really get to the ground. He looked a bit embarrassing. So to throw him in there in a boxing ring with a young, hungry guy in Jake Paul, I was back in Ben Askren, and then in the weeks leading up to the fight, something switched in my head and just thought, what am I doing? What am I going on about? Ben Askren's going to get fucked up here. I listened to True Geordie, and he said one thing about, forget all the experience, forget everything you know about these 2 guys, just go on what the eye tells you, just base your opinion off what the eye can see. And what the eye could see was an awkward, old, mixed martial artist who's got no stand-up game, going up against a young, hungry, in shape, looking pretty fast, looking pretty slick guy who's trying to get into boxing, who's been doing it for a couple of years in all fairness to him, and he's been committed to the sport. So he looks fucking good. He looks like the bollocks compared to this dude who looks awkward and moves awkward. And I know right now my hands are aiming at Tyron Woodley, but I was on about Ben Askren. So he walks through Ben Askren as well. What do you know? Ben Askren's a good friend of Tyron Woodley. Former, if not current, training partners. I don't know how much training either guy's doing now that they're not really too active in, mixed martial arts. But Yeah, very good friends. Tyron was actually at the fight, you know, representing Ben Askren's team. There was a bit of a clip that we saw backstage of Tyron Woodley going at it with Jake and some of his members of his team. Maybe that's how we ended up here. Potentially. So how do we see this one playing out? Like I said, you've got Jake Paul, who's constantly trying to climb the levels, constantly trying to take a step up in the level of opposition each time he steps out. And I've got a lot of respect for him for doing that. I'm actually quite intrigued to watch this progression and see how far Jake Paul can actually take this. Because if he knocks out Tyron Woodley, where does he go next? Does he fight someone like Nate Diaz, who's still active in the sport, who hasn't been let go by the UFC, who hasn't, you know, kind of taken a break from their mixed martial arts career, who hasn't potentially completely retired altogether? Is that the next step? It almost feels like, is Jake Paul trying to build up to a fight with Conor McGregor? What happens if he beats Tyron Woodley? Then potentially, let's say, gets a fight with Nate Diaz. And let's say, hypothetically, Conor McGregor loses to Dustin Poirier in July. Does this lead towards then Conor McGregor seeing this as his next fight? As his next biggest paycheck? Does Jake Paul actually manage to get himself a fight with Conor McGregor? And I know there's a lot of ifs and buts along the way, but this geezer is actually taking a step up every time he steps out. So fair fucking play to him, and let's see how far he can take this. But he has to get through Tyron Woodley, and Tyron Woodley is on a 4-fight skid. Ever since he lost the belt, he lost to Kamaru Usman. He lost to Gilbert Burns. He lost to Colby Covington. And he lost to Vicente Luque. And what I would say about 3 of them 4 fights, the first 3 I mentioned, from Usman to Colby, he looked like a shadow of his former self. He didn't look like the Tyron Woodley that we used to know. The champion Tyron Woodley, who was able to mix it up. He could take it to the ground if he needed to, but he was quite happy to stand and strike, you know, on his feet. Just stand there in front of his opponent, kind of skidding around the outside, kind of countering with that sort of, you know, looking for that counter shot to really hurt and stun his opponent. And that's a lot of the time where he ended the fight. You know, this guy had gone and beat Darren Till. He got through Stephen Wonderboy Thompson twice. One of the best strikers in the UFC, potentially. In my opinion, he's definitely up there in probably the top 5, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, of all fucking weight divisions in the UFC. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is up there. And Tyron Woodley got through him twice, you know, 1 draw, 1 victory. And now he's facing Jake Paul. Like I said, 3 of them 4, he really looked shy. He looked shy to pull the trigger. He looked shy to let them hands go. And then he got into that 4th fight against Vicente Luque, which potentially, you know, he probably was going into there thinking, this is my last chance to save my UFC career. Because now it looks like, you know, he's been released from the organisation. He's left the organisation. And he really put it all on the line in that fight. He really let it all go. He really left it all in the octagon. I actually had respect for Tyron Woodley coming out of that fight. His previous 3 fights were disappointments. But against Vicente Luque, he went out on his shield. He went out on it. He let it all go. He let them hands fly. He let them hands swing. And if he just does that, even, you know, if he just does that the way he did against Vicente Luque, that should be enough to beat Jake Paul, in my opinion. Tyron Woodley is a talented, gifted, and well-trained UFC MMA athlete. He's been around for a long time. He's done this sport. He's been there, and he's seen it all. He's on a 4-fight losing skid. Does he really want to make that 5 in his whole combat sports career up to date of most recent, you know, 5 fights in a row to take a loss to end that against Jake Paul, a YouTuber? Does he really want to do that? I don't believe so. I don't believe Tyron Woodley's taking his fight just for a paycheck. Yes, he's come out and said this is the biggest paycheck he's going to get out of his whole mixed martial arts career. But I don't think he's just doing it for that. He doesn't want to be embarrassed by Jake Paul. He saw what happened to Ben Askren. He saw that he got beaten by Jake Paul, and I think he wants to avenge his friend. I think he's taking it a little bit personally. I think he really wants to shut this kid up in Jake, the problem child Paul. Or has he seen how much money Ben Askren made and he thought, I'll have a piece of that? I fucking hope not. Because because I want to see a good fight. I'm so glad I didn't stay up to watch the Ben Askren versus Jake Paul fight. I'm so glad I didn't. I'm so glad I chose to watch the UFC instead. And I'm so glad I caught the highlights the next day. Because I would have been so pissed with myself if I stayed up for that. But this time, this fight really intrigues me. Like I said, Jake Paul looks pretty committed, dedicated to the sport of boxing. He looks like he's got some sort of skills to pay somewhat the bills. And yeah, he looks good in there, but he looks good against poor opposition. Now he's in there with Tyron Woodley. Like I said, he can let them hands go. It's just a question of if he does. And I hope he does. Because if he does, my prediction is going to be that Tyron Woodley will knock Jake Paul out within 3 rounds. And it's an 8-round fight. Booked in, what, a 20-by-20 ring? I'm backing Tyron Woodley for this one. I have to. I know I backed Ben Askren on my channel last time, but I started to sway in favour Jake Paul, I have to be honest. But this time, I just believe Tyron Woodley, as long as he lets them hands go, he will get his arm raised, he will get the victory against Jake Paul. This time, we've really got to see Jake Paul tested in some deep waters, and I believe when he hits them deep waters with the likes of a Tyron Woodley, he's getting knocked out. Tyron Woodley to knock out Jake Paul within 3 rounds is my prediction. Let me know your prediction in the comment section below. I've been your boy Jimmy. This has been GTS Combat. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Till next time.